era comes to an end, I guess it has an impact for people who don't care at all about the band. But I know that I'm speaking to a crowd of people who go regularly to the Beacon, and it's a weird thing to think about for a lot of us. It's not even, there's the actual experience that you have at the shows at the Beacon, which, for a lot of us have been oftentimes quite profound. But there's also just the rhythm. There's certain things you do every year. It's like in September, kids go back to school. It's the Jewish holidays, if you're of the faith. Christmas time, you have this break, whether you're Christian or not, you have this break of New Year's. And then March, you have the Allmans at the Beacon, and when it's over, it's sort of spring. And it's really just part of the rhythm of the year. So it's a strange thing to look out and think about it not being there. And I don't have any inside information that it's not going to be for sure. I don't have any information about Greg's health or when the shows are going to be rescheduled. A lot of people have been asking me all of those things. And I'm trying to find out, but if I do, probably will be under the condition that I don't tell you anyhow. I'm going to read a little bit, but I basically just want to talk, if that's okay. Because, I think all of you guys know how to read. So you can read for yourself. I know some of you already have read the book. And then Kirk and I will talk a little bit. So I think most of you tonight, I know a lot of you have been here other nights and had a chance to look around at the photos, which I think are just fantastic. And there's about 75 or 80 of Kirk's photos in the book. And Kirk also was the photo editor of the book. So aside from the photos that are actually his, he played a big role in what's there and in helping me. And just to speak a little bit while I'm on the topic about that, my relationship with Kirk has been very central to my involvement with the Allman Brothers Band. And as I've done a lot of radio interviews for the book, one guy I talked to said, well, you're like an embedded journalist. You're like a guy embedded with the Marines. You're like you embedded with the Allman Brothers. How did you do that? And that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's close enough to true. And really the way I did it essentially was in large part due to my relationship with Kirk. And he and I met just because I was a journalist writing about the band with an interest in them. He was a tour magician. I think when we first met he was a tour mystic. Then he would become the tour magician. Nobody really ever could explain what Kirk did. He just sort of did everything, and everything and nothing. But if everybody kind of knew he was the guy to get things done if you wanted something done with the Allman Brothers. He was the guy who would really get it done. And he also had this extensive archive of photos, which again came in really handy in pulling together this book. So I'm going to read you just a little bit from the author's note, which is basically the introduction, and give you a feel for it, and then we'll talk a little and take some questions. One Way Out is the culmination of 30 years trying to untangle the myths and legends surrounding the Allman Brothers Band. I've interviewed the members hundreds of times, shared meals, ridden buses, quietly watched rehearsals, and attended countless shows. Through it all, I've never lost sight of why this story matters, the music. Any access I've gained has been in the service of trying to understand how this exotic brew came to be. I've viewed everything with the eyes and ears of a journalist, but the heart and soul of a fan. The Allman Brothers Band, I believe, has no equal. And actually, I'd just like to stop there and talk a little bit about that sentence. I viewed everything with the eyes and ears of a journalist, but the heart and soul of a fan. I was asked by a very astute interviewer yesterday how I managed that division. How did I know when I was working as a journalist, when I was operating as a fan or a friend of the band or the person I was interviewing? And the reason I wanted to stop and talk about that is I do think it's a really interesting topic. And it can be a perilous situation because ultimately I do feel as a journalist that I'm there to serve my reader. I'm not really there if I'm interviewing Warren Haynes and he feels comfortable enough to invite me to his apartment to do the interview, which just happened, I'm not just there to hang out with Warren and see his apartment or say, hey, this is so cool, I'm in Warren's apartment. I'm there to do an interview. And there was a point, I would say, where I had a couple of interviews where, especially with Lauren, where I felt afterwards that I hadn't really adequately prepared because I had gotten so used to talking to him, and it was so not a big deal for me to talk to him. And in transcribing the interviews and preparing the story, I kind of realized that I had fallen down on the job. Basically, it's a form of getting lazy or too comfortable, and I was upset with myself. And I sort of rededicated to not doing that. In terms of when I was being a fan or a friend, and when I was being a journalist, because I spent so much time talking to some of the guys, especially Derek and Warren and Woody when he was still with us, you know, I did have to set some guidelines. I would basically tell those guys, when we're talking, we're talking, when we're interviewing, we're interviewing. So I would never use something that someone told me when we were just talking, when it wasn't a formal interview. If they said something that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to use, I would ask them, or I would stop, or I would double back next time we were doing an interview, say when we were talking, you said the following, is that okay to use? It can be a fine line, and occasionally you know things that you just can't use, but because this is a long-term project, you know, it's a 30-year thing, there's plenty of things in here that I couldn't use at the time I first knew about them, that eventually I could. And again, I would double back and check with people. I'm not trying to trap anyone. And so it's a situation where sometimes you have to give up something that you'd really like to run with or use for the longer term gain to maintain the long-term relationship. And the fact is, so much of the access I got was because people trusted me. So if you violate the trust, you know, that goes away. So it is an interesting fine line that something that changes. And it was interesting even with Kirk, because we spoke so often over the years, and even in the writing of this book, you know, I would call him all the time and say, so-and-so says this, and so-and-so says that, what do you think? And we just try to recreate timelines and just try to be as careful as possible. It comes down to certain things that you just can't tell exactly what happened, and that's why there's some places here where I present multiple versions of things side by side, which I thought was kind of an interesting way to do it. But eventually, I called Kirk and I said, okay, now we're going to do an interview. You know, now we're going to actually talk and we're going to record it, and this is actually for the book. So anything you say now, I'm assuming, is for publication. And, you know, of course, you can always stop and say, hey, don't quote that. But he didn't do that really at all, and most people didn't. You know, even on a few things where I promised people I would get back to them and make sure they were okay with it, there was very, very little that people didn't want included. And I think, you know, probably 10 years ago, I started really wanting to write a book about the Allman brothers. And then I didn't do it, and then I sort of veered in a different direction. I moved to China for 4 years, and I kind of thought that whole stage of my life was more or less over. While I was there, I think Skydog came out, Dwayne Allman book, which is, you know, I think it's a pretty good book. And I was upset when it came out, and I was excited and I was upset because I thought maybe my moment had passed. Obviously, that didn't happen. And what I realized eventually, in retrospect, is that this was the right time to do it for me personally, but also because there's a lot of things that if I had tried to write the book 5 or 10 years ago, people wouldn't have talked about or wanted on the record. And now, as guys sort of get to the point of looking close to the end of this, and I'm not saying it's the end because I just really don't know, but certainly, you know, they're looking at that as a real possibility. People are more ready to be real and to have an interest in having what they consider the real story on the record. And that's a change that I couldn't have realized 5 or 10 years ago that would have been the case. But I realize now, looking back, that it was. So I'd like to bring Kirk up to talk a little bit, and I'd like to, there's a lot of things I could just keep prattling on about, but I know that there's specific things some of you are interested in. So I'd love to take a question or two, and then Kirk will come up, and then we'll do some more questions. Does anybody have any?